Alright, today I want to talk about gun tropes, like quick draw at high noon, and cleavage reload. No, we'll keep that for later as an honorable mention or dishonorable mention, however you want to look at it. There's so many stereotypes and myths propagated by Hollywood, right? And it's kind of hard to choose. But I'm going to go with my personal top 5 silliest gun tropes. In no particular order, this is just something fun to overthink and nerd out about. So first off, Hollywood suppressors. This goes a little beyond just silly because I'm pretty sure that the way Hollywood has portrayed them has directly contributed to prohibitions. Because suppressors are banned in a lot of countries. They are usually portrayed as assassin's tools, used to completely silently take down a victim. The silliest example that I'm aware of is from John Wick 2, ironically, because this series generally has more realism than you would normally expect in action flicks like that. Keanu Reeves did a lot of professional training for this, but when John Wick has a stealth shootout with Cassian at a subway station, this is just... First off, Cassian's suppressor is comically tiny. If you try to make something like this in real life, it would do next to nothing. Either way, this is something that's unfortunately tricky to convey in video. I've tried.
It may seem straightforward, unsuppressed MP5 around 160 decibels, which is extremely loud for such a small caliber, by the way. 85 decibels and above starts to damage your hearing. 140 decibels is considered the pain threshold, which is roughly where the suppressed MP5 clocks in. The tricky thing is that a 20 decibel reduction actually means it's 4 times quieter, so more like this. But I said, that's still the pain threshold. So it goes from extremely loud to painfully loud. Great, huh?
The microphone always levels the audio to an extent. And it has to, because otherwise the discrepancy between loud and quiet sounds would be astronomical. In fact, what you're hearing right now is compressed further so that the fluctuations in my voice between loud and quiet are not too bad. Because if I'm just talking somewhat more quietly, then it might be difficult for you to hear, as opposed to when my voice picks up, gets way louder. So you always compress quite a bit to make for a more pleasant listening experience. Gunshots are really, really damn loud. Right? So the discrepancy is huge. The way the microphone records it, you can't actually tell a difference between suppressed and unsuppressed. You can tell the difference in the quality of the sound, like the character of the noise, if you will. It sounds different, but it doesn't really sound quieter. The quietest you could get would be a firearm chamber in .22 long rifle with a suppressor using subsonic ammunition.
The lowest test results you find are usually 110 to 120 decibels. So even suppressed firearms are not safe to shoot without ear protection. The Well Rod is a bolt-action pistol designed from the ground up to be as quiet as possible with an integrated suppressor. Apparently the .32 caliber version can be as quiet as 73 decibels. That's a remarkable reduction, but still about as loud as an alarm clock or some vacuum cleaners.
It's very noticeable still. And especially people walking right next to them will absolutely 100% hear it. Sure, random people going about their daily business tend to be very distracted and not really pay attention. They will overlook a lot of things, but that, no. And the weird thing is that movies almost always show suppressors being used with pistols or maybe submachine guns, or generally fairly up close, right? Which is exactly what doesn't make sense. If you use a suppressor on a rifle, say 1,000 meters or yards away, or even several thousand, yeah, then it might be more difficult to locate where the shot came from. So silencers in movies and video games too, for that matter, are generally totally exaggerated, but at least they're not as silly as the next trope, which is punch shooting. In the movie Desperado, El Mariachi is guilty of that. The exact opposite of what you want to do. So, marksmanship with a pistol is quite challenging. I made another video about that, talking about what makes it challenging and how most people have no idea how difficult it is until they try it. This is a pretty short barrel, so the distance between the sights is fairly short, and the shorter the sight radius is, the easier it is to throw it off without noticing. By the way, this is unloaded, but it's only a CO2 revolver anyway. There's so many things you can do wrong by jerking the trigger. You know, if you do that, it'll just twitch a little bit, and at greater distances, this throws the shot off wildly. Even something as simple as squeezing the grip too hard, or having it misaligned in your hand, or wrapping too much of the finger around, these are all things that can make a difference. So guess what that does? That is idiot mode for destroying accuracy altogether. It makes zero sense in any world, and there's absolutely no reason. Like, yeah, in theory, you would add to the velocity of the bullet, you would add the velocity of your arm punching forward, which at those numbers is completely insignificant and absolutely not worth ruining your aim.
It's even worse. I'm not doing it poorly enough there. Instead of pushing forward, he even adds an arc to it. It's masterfully wrong.
So silly. And yes, gun spinning is silly too, but at least you're not doing it while aiming, thereby completely ruining your accuracy. Next up, the trope that I would call pushy bullets. Guns sending people flying through the air. Now, this serves the rule of cool quite nicely, and it's very satisfying to watch. Physics doesn't quite operate that way. The force goes both ways. So if it's enough oomph to knock someone over, it would knock you over as well as the shooter. There are, of course, cases where people have been shot and fell for various reasons. Maybe it's because of the damage being done, you know, like they just faint, or you know, their system shuts down, so to speak, and they collapse because of that. Or maybe it's structural damage, you know, being hit in the hip bone or something, and otherwise just, you know, collapsing because of that. Or it could be psychological, you know, like they know they've been shot and they, you know, they trip and fall, or they just fall down because they're like, oh no, help. There's a number of ways in which it can happen, but not by the sheer force of the push from the bullets or slugs, even if you have something like a 12 gauge shotgun, which depending on the load will kick quite a bit, and in fact, it may knock some people over who are shooting it. You know, if it's a lightweight shooter who is off balance, doesn't have a proper stance, and it knocks them in the shoulder, yeah, they might stumble and fall. Sure. But if you know what you're doing with it, you're bracing against it, it'll punch you in the shoulder, it might hurt, depending on, again, how hot the load is, but that's about it. And people being hit by it, it depends on what it is. If it's a slug, they might stagger, they might fall down, but they're not, again, they're not going to be pushed off their feet and flying through a window or something crazy like that. That's generally not how it works.
Even funnier when it happens to the T-800 in the first Terminator movie. A 400 to 600 pound robot covered in bodybuilder flesh going full ragdoll.
Certain ways in which you can maximize the sort of pushing effect. Basically by increasing the momentum at the expense of kinetic energy. If you think about being literally shoved, right? Shoved with both hands, someone puts their entire body weight into it, you'll be pushed back, you know, depending on the difference in body weight and all that, but it's a shove, right? But imagine that the same amount of effort being put into a punch that connects with just two knuckles, concentrates it quite a bit, versus the exact same thing, again, same level of effort, being put into a dagger thrust, right? Where this is all concentrated on a really small surface. So a less lethal rubber slug fired from a shotgun is more likely to push people around than is, say, buckshot or even birdshot. Being hit by a cannonball is a different story, but of course, the cannons are not handheld. Or used like bazookas. Next up, laser sights, or specifically laser sights on movie sniper rifles. They have their benefits, and they even allow fairly accurate firing from the hip, which is also common in Hollywood and not so much in the real world. But putting them on a rifle that's supposed to be hidden is the dumbest thing you can think of in terms of how to use a firearm. I mean, sure, the obvious thing is you're supposed to show the viewer. But you can show them by putting the target in a reticle, by showing the view through the scope. You can show that quite effectively as well, without giving away who it is either. You can't use a laser sight at long distances. You need the scope to see the target properly. And if you do, you don't need the dot. You're already looking at the target through the scope. There's 100% no purpose here. It is completely self-defeating and silly. The thing is, even if you don't notice the dot on your chest in your peripheral vision, you would still see a bright red light where the laser is projected in your direction. Because either if it's during daytime, it has to be extremely bright for the shooter to be able to see it. Or if it's at nighttime, well, obviously it's a bright red light. You will still see it. So one thing I've always found kind of odd is in the first Terminator movie, the T-800 goes for an AMT hardballer long slide 45 with a laser sight. And that seems a little redundant because the T-800 has internal targeting systems. We should be able to just point and shoot from any position and be able to triangulate. So why is he using that? I used to have a Crimson Trace laser grip on a Smith & Wesson MMP9, and it was pretty neat. It would automatically come on when you grip the pistol firmly, and it's kind of a cool range toy. And yes, it works, but honestly, not as well as a red dot sight. First off, you still have to be on. Like, you can't just wildly point somewhere and then see the dot and then bring the dot on the target. If you're off by quite a bit, the dot will be somewhere in the distance where you can't even see it anymore. And even on the highest brightness setting, it's not very easy to see on a sunny day. And it is nice to be able to look at the target directly, but it doesn't really benefit you all that much. Again, aside from the ability to shoot from any position. That's pretty neat that you don't have to bring it up. Although again, if you just shoot from the hip, if you point it somewhere, then the dot may be so far off that he might be chasing, you know, like the cat chasing after the laser pointer. So yeah, laser sights are neat and can be useful in certain situations, but stealthy sniping is not one of those. And finally, it's high noon. The idea that two gunslingers would agree to meet in public at high noon to have a shootout when the entire town clears out and the sheriff doesn't give a hoot is wild. Even more wild than Bill. And that's one of the few instances where it happened kind of like that. Wild Bill Hickok versus Davis Tutt on the 21st of July, 1865 in Springfield, Missouri. The way this went down is Tutt had taken Hickok's gold watch, who couldn't pay his gambling debt at the time. And then Hickok warned him to not wear it in public to humiliate him. And well, Tutt did anyway. And when Hickok ran into him, he challenged him right then and there. It was not at high noon, it was actually around 6 p.m. and they were not setting it up ahead of time. They just ran to each other and then, you know, Hickok challenged him and they squared off at a remarkably long distance of supposedly 50 yards, or about 50 meters. That's very far for pistols, and I'm guessing this might have been the point. I don't know for sure, but I'm kind of suspecting they might have set up particularly far in the hopes that both would miss, but honor was satisfied, right? Because that was kind of the main thing here. Hickok couldn't let it slide that Tutt would humiliate him like that, and Tutt couldn't let it slide that Hickok threatened him and told him not to wear the watch, right? So they were kind of at an impasse when it comes to preserving their honor. And you know, having this duel and shooting at each other and hopefully both miss, honor would be satisfied, that's the end of it, done, right? But Todd missed, Hickok didn't. So Hickok was arrested and tried and narrowly escaped a lynching. In the end, the jury decided that it was justified as self-defense in reference to the unwritten law of a fair fight. But that was a controversial decision. A lot of people would have liked to see him hang for that, and it wasn't really according to the law, it was really more of an exception. Even in earlier times in Europe, when pistol duels were more common, they were never done this way. They had to be done privately, somewhere in the woods, away from the public eye, because they were highly illegal. The same way as in the Wild West, you couldn't just randomly challenge someone to a duel and have a shootout, especially, again, in the public when bystanders could be injured. That was highly illegal pretty much anywhere at all times. And they would not do it in the Hollywood way, quick drawing from the holster, whether it be cross draw or from the right side, and then fan. This one doesn't allow fanning as such. You have to first cock the hammer and then fire subsequently. So, because, I mean, this makes no sense at such distances. From what I can gather, there aren't a lot of historical references to hip shooting. Sometimes you would find a mention of someone who liked to do it, but was terrible at it. You know, they were a lot more accurate actually aiming, and they did it differently, by the way. It was more like that. That was the general stance. And it makes a whole lot more sense to actually aim as opposed to just vaguely point in the general direction. It would work in some situations. You know, like if we're standing this far apart, right now I'm like 1.5 meters, maybe 2 from the camera. Sure, in this case, I can generally point. You can probably see that it is pretty much pointing at the lens more or less. So in this case, absolutely, you could draw, but what I find, you don't even have to do it this way. You can just, if you practice this, this is not the right revolver for that, particularly because that latch here is really loose, but you can draw and cock the hammer pretty much in one motion. It's just a matter of practicing this, right? And then you can fire immediately. So that's doable, but not in the way it's done in Hollywood. Anyway, so those are the silliest gun tropes in my book. Let me know if there are any others that you find particularly silly. Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you think about the video. But before you leave, there are still the 2 dishonorable mentions that I mentioned earlier in the video, or honorable, depending on how you feel about it. One is the bottomless magazine, where someone with a 6-shot revolver fires 10 times, or a double-barrel shotgun that fires 3 times or even more often before needing to reload. A good example of that is Ash in Army of Darkness. Of course, that movie is not taking itself seriously whatsoever. It's comedic. Although it is kind of funny that they're not committing to the infinite ammo power, because he does reload at some points. If he just never reloaded, that would be a different story. But if you're going to show a firearm being reloaded in the first place, then why don't you stick to it? And it's very deliberate, obviously, particularly when they're using blanks in prop guns. They know that they've run out of ammunition. In fact, they had to put in new blanks in between shots, but they're still committing to it and still pretending like that's somehow possible. But it's pretty trivial because, for one, as I said, it happens a lot in movies that don't take themselves seriously to begin with, or perhaps the reloading might be happening out of frame in between shots, and it's also not that common anymore overall. And finally, there's unorthodox reloads, which just is pure fun. And in some cases, they commit to it so much that you cannot criticize it even for a second. Even for the purposes of fun overthinking. I mean, come on, this is just for the lulz. And I can respect that. If you go all the way and just say, screw it, there's not even a hint of realism in anything, hell yeah, why not? It's fun. I mean, when she's pulling a whole ass bazooka out from between her knockers, you know that this is not to be taken seriously in the slightest. And that's fine. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think, and take care, folks.